Okay, I think I'm live actually. So I'm testing out a bunch of stuff here to see if this works because I'm going to be discussing some of work with Dr. Felipe de. Oh no, I misspelled his name in the title already. Too many Christmas. Um, is this? Oh, it says I'm live. Okay, cool. So I'm just trying to test this out because tomorrow I'm going to be talking with Dr. Felipe de Brigard, and we're talking about his work generally and also some of this IIT, integrated information theory, brouhaha. He was a signature of that letter, and he has more interesting, broader, various interests as well. So I want to make sure this works, and I've never really used the setup that I'm trying right now. So I don't know if it's gonna work. Let's go ahead and try. I'm just gonna practice by watching a little bit of this video. What is memory? Which was put up on the Brains blog YouTube channel, and is part of this neuromechanisms um, series which they produced, which is very cool actually for an introductory sort of thing about cognitive neuroscience and stuff like that. So I just want to test this out, but I don't know how much of this I'll watch. It's a half hour, but let's just see if you can hear it and if I can see what's going on and stuff like that. Okay.
All right, welcome everyone to today's lecture on the neurophilosophy of memory with a little bit of imagination. So let me start today by talking about this word memory, which is actually quite polysemous. What does it mean to say that someone has good memory? So it turns out that the term memory could mean lots of different things. You can say of a person that she has a really good memory and mean by that that she has a really big storage for information. But memory can also refer to the process of retrieving that information, let's say the process of remembering. Now, other people might say, look, she has a really, really good memory, but they don't mean that she has really a lot of information in that storage or that the storage is really big. But in particular, they might mean that they have particular mental states that have certain properties that are different from other mental states, say perceptions or dreams or imagination. Memory can also refer to a property of the stored information as opposed to the information itself, right? Um, some people might refer to memory in terms of the experience. I am having a memory experience as opposed to referring to memory as the storage of the information that brings about that experience or the process of bringing out that information from that storage. So we use the term memory to refer to all sorts of different things. And as a result, when we talk about the neurophilosophy and the neuroscience of memory, it is important to know exactly what we mean by the term. Now, uh, difficulties with definition of memory aside, what scientists try to do is to sort of sidestep that concern and talk instead in terms of operationalizations. How do you operationalize the term memory? So here are some examples that I would like to bring out, and then you're going to identify that there are some problems with them. So take, for instance, the first example of this operationalization of the term memory: behavioral changes as a consequence of an experience. If you take any textbook in the neuroscience or in the psychology of memory, you might find this as a definition. The problem, of course, is that there are lots of behavioral changes that result or are a consequence of a previous experience that you wouldn't call a memory. For instance, if you eat something that it is past its due date, you might have a tummy ache. You wouldn't say, however, that that is a memory of what you ate. It is, now, however, a behavior that is a consequence of a previous experience. Likewise, if you get sunburn in your skin, um, you have a consequence, which is that you're going to have a rash or something like that, but you wouldn't call that a memory of having been exposed to sun. So it seems as though this definition is too broad. Another possibility is to operationalize the term memory as the capacity to remember previous experiences or previous information. Now, the problem with this operationalization, of course, is that it's rather circular because it is defining memory in terms of remembering. And we think that remembering is the process by means of which memory retrieves information from that storage, right? Another possibility, too, is to talk about memory in terms of the retention of internal representations of past events. The problem is that this is already a very theoretically laden definition or operationalization of memory because it already commits you to the idea that there are internal representations that somehow store the information that you experienced in the past. And as we are going to see, this is a very contentious claim. So this brief introduction just wants you to bring to bear the fact that this notion of memory not only is polysemous, as a folk psychological term, but also is very difficult to articulate a clear-cut operationalization that is precise enough to only capture the terms, the concept.
All right, hold on. So I can hear it just fine, but the video looks like it's skipping a little bit. I wonder if it's coming because of the streaming or if this is how it was originally videoed. Okay, so I think you can hear everything. I'm not sure, people. I can hear it. Okay, so let's check a bit more of this out. And I like what he's saying, though. This looks pretty interesting. I have to admit, I haven't watched this before. I was meaning to watch some of these neuromechanism things, so maybe I will get around to doing that for real. But right now, I'm just testing things out. Seems like it's working.
That we want to study, and also that it is not too broad so as to include things that we don't want to include in memory. So as it happens, we're going to have to move on without a precise characterization of memory, but something like just this vague idea that we all have to begin with. All right. With that caveat in mind, what I would like to do in this just 1 hour presentation is to go over 3 specific questions that both philosophers and neuroscientists have been interested in. These are by no means exclusive, by no means an exclusive list of things that we can study from the point of view of the neurophilosophy of memory, but are 3 questions that have been perhaps studied the most at the intersection between the neuroscience and the philosophy of memory. The first general question is, what is memory? And within that sort of general question, we're going to have 2 sub-questions. The first one is, how can we distinguish memory from imagination? And the second one is, how many different kinds of memory are there? The second big question that we're going to discuss is, what exactly do memory do? Like, what is exactly the operation that memory does? Now, a typical response, and perhaps an obvious response, is that what memory does is to remember, right? But as we're going to see, that answer is somewhat contentious. Within the context of the science of memory, scientists typically distinguish these 3 stages of operation, one that is called encoding, storage, and retrieval. We're going to talk about that. In addition to that, we're going to talk about what this remembering thing that we think memory does. And we're going to see that philosophers disagree, as well as neuroscientists, as to exactly what does remembering consist in. And finally, we're going to touch a little bit about this debate as to how exactly memory and imagination interact. And the final question is a question about what we remember. So in a sense, it would seem pretty obvious that the answer is that what we remember is the past. But we're going to see that the answer turns out to be really tricky. So we're going to discuss this question in the context of 2 sub-questions. One is what our memory is about, and the second one, which is a typical answer, is that the carriers of that which memories are about are called memory traces. So we're going to talk about the nature of memory traces a little bit. So hope you're all ready. All right, let's start off talking about memory using this old way of thinking about categories that we learned from Aristotle. The strategy, as he calls it, is strategy of per genus et differentiam. Basically, the idea is to identify what a thing is by telling us under which category is subsumed, and as such, how it is distinguished from other things within that category. And in addition to that, what are subcategories that belong to it, right? So we're going to identify the difference and the genus or the category to which it belongs to. So we can think of memory as a faculty that is different from other cognitive faculties, such as imagination, perception, and so on and so forth. But in addition to that, we can think of memory as being a process that itself is constituted by some other kinds of processes. So what are those faculties that memory is distinguished from, and what are those subclasses that belong to memory? That is the question that we're going to try to tackle next. So, in fact, that very same question is the question that many neuroscientists have been asking for quite some time. And the story, even though it is, as many of these stories, is a little bit more nuanced, is typically traced back to the case of this individual that is known in the literature as HM, but now we know that his actual name was Henri Monson. HM was one of the most famous patients in the history of neuropsychology, perhaps. Turns out that HM had intractable epilepsy, suffered from very severe epilepsy, and when he was very young, he had a bike accident that exacerbated his epilepsy. So when I mean exacerbated, it is really, really debilitating. So people might know that when you have epilepsy, there are typically two kinds of attacks that you can have. A petit malade, that it is called, when a person sort of loses consciousness for a little bit of time. But then there are obviously the grand malades. The grand malades is when seizures occur and the whole body is shaken and so forth. A person with a very severe epilepsy might have a couple of grand malades per semester, right? And then maybe a few petit malades, once every week or so. And apparently, it was the case with HM that in the more severe stages of his condition, he will have several grand malades per day. So it was so extraordinarily debilitating that he had to drop out of school. It was very, very difficult for him to go on. So difficult it was that in his 20s, he went to see a doctor, and then the doctors determined that the right course of action was to intervene in his brain and to remove the hippocampi, the miotemporal lobes. And then there you can see in the screen the original depictions of how the surgery went. But the point is that after the surgery, when his hippocampi have been removed in both sides of the brain, HM developed an extraordinary deficit in his memory. Specifically, he was completely unable to encode new information about experiences. So if you can see in the panel, the yellow panel, there are three ways of talking about amnesia. One way of talking about amnesia is what is called anterograde amnesia, in which what occurs is that previous memories prior to the accident, in this case the surgery, are preserved, but experiences that happen after the surgery are completely gone, in the sense that they cannot be encoded. Retrograde amnesia refers to the opposite effect, is when you have an accident and anything that happens prior to the accident is gone, but after the accident people can encode information again. And of course, you can have cases of complete amnesia, in which what occurs is that memories prior to and memories from after the accident are completely gone. The case of HM, they tell us that he had a profound anterograde amnesia, but he had some retrograde amnesia, in the sense that it appears as though he was able to still remember some events that happened to him prior to the accident, but after the accident, no information was encoded again. Interestingly, after the event, after the surgery happened, and HM had so much difficulty and with actual quite impossibility encoding new memories from experiences, it was tested that there were certain things that nevertheless he was able to learn. And in one of the most perhaps famous experiments with HM, Dr. Brandon Milner tested his ability to learn a very complex motor skill task. The task consisted in drawing inside of the contours of a star-shaped thing. But the tricky thing is that he was doing it not by looking at his hand at the pen directly, but rather by looking at the reflection of his hand and his pen directly. If you try to do it at home, you'll notice that it is very, very difficult, and you're going to make errors. Namely, you're going to be outside of the borders of the star quite often. However, with practice, you will get better. This is exactly what happened with HM. He started off making all the same mistakes that you will make the first time around, but then the second day that he was tested on that very same task, he made fewer errors, until, as you can see in the screen, it was basically flat, namely errorless. Now, interestingly, when Dr. Milner would ask him, "Do you remember having made this task before?" He would say, "No, I've never done it before." Nevertheless, his practice and his performance, it was very clear that he had learned from previous exposures. This generated the idea then that there was some kind of memory, say call it back at the time procedural memory, that was still preserved in someone like HM, namely someone that lacked a hippocampus. It was more his declarative memory, his memory about experiences, things that in order for you to remember them, you need to be able to be consciously aware of encoding them, and also be able to be consciously aware at the time of declaring them. That was the memory that was impaired, but his procedural memory apparently was intact. Later on, Larry Squire, also depicted here in the screen, conducted a series of parallel studies with other cases of individuals with amnesia due to temporal lobe damage, and in particular due to deterioration of the hippocampus. And as you can see, for various reasons, so there were Korsakoff patients, patients that have brain accidents, and so on and so forth, all of which compromised the hippocampus. And as you can see, they all follow the exact same pattern, in the sense that they all seem to be able to learn new procedures, new skills, and still incapable of encoding new episodic or new experiential information. Uh, More importantly, so what this suggests, right, is that the brain structures that are involved in our capacity to encode and then to retrieve episodes of our ordinary life, which is what was impaired in HM, might be different from the brain structures that are in charge of helping us to learn skills like that of drawing the contours.
Okay, so I think that's good. Still 15 minutes of this. I want to watch the whole thing. I'm kind of getting sucked up into it, but I was really just meant to test this out. Tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m., I'll be talking with Felipe in person on Consciousness Live about his work on memory and the IIT controversy as well. So that is interesting, though, that HM, it's a sad case, but one of the things they don't really talk about, I wonder if he's going to get to it though, is that HM's dad died after his surgery, so he would constantly be asking where's his father, and he couldn't form the memory that his dad had died, so he learned information, and it was really sad. But eventually he stopped asking. Where's my dad, seemingly suggesting that he did in fact learn that his dad was dead, had passed on. So, well, the traditional view has it that his these kind of memories will be formed in the hippocampus and then transmitted for storage somewhere else in the cortex. But as we were finding out, he doesn't have a hippocampus, so there's got to be something beyond the hippocampus that's encoding those memories. In addition, also, by the way, he could still remember things from his past. And often we're told in introductory textbooks that the hippocampus is importantly involved in retrieving memories, as well as like consolidating them, reconsolidating them, etc. But HM had no hippocampus, and yet could still like recall things from his childhood and stuff, just couldn't form new memories. So it does kind of, it sheds light on the function of the hippocampus, and makes this distinction that Felipe is talking about between procedural memory and semantic memory very vivid, but it leaves some other questions unanswered. Like, how is it that he learned to stop asking, where's his dad? And how can he still recall things from his childhood without the hippocampus? Okay, so that's very cool. Right, so I think that's enough for one day. I didn't really find out if this works. I don't even know if I can be heard. So hopefully this will have worked, and we'll be back tomorrow for more. Oh yeah, so how do I turn this thing off?